Hello everyone, and welcome to the MT&A Top 20 Rankings Post-Event 4. We've seen the major, we've seen the transfer window, and now we've had our first look at all the teams with their new rosters and how they stack up. So without further ado, let's get into our first rankings of the second split. Coming in at number 20 is your 9 Lives roster of Hawkster, Chicago, and Zenil. Now, keep in mind, we're only taking results from Open 4, so all the results that we saw in the North American Swiss stage for Open 5 don't count. So, you can put 2 and 2 together. These guys probably won't be here next week, unfortunately. But for now, after Open 4, they're at number 20. Their average ranking was 19.6. Their highest placement was 17. Their lowest placement was unranked, and they had a standard deviation of 1.51. Back into the rankings this week is Corinthians Esports. You have Drops, Raisbull, and Brad. These guys had an average ranking of 19.4, with their highest being a 17, lowest being unranked, and a slightly higher standard deviation of 1.74. At number 18, with no movement, is your only APAC representative on the top 20 aggregate. This is Luminosity with Sphinx, Sosa, and Catalysm. These guys had an average ranking of 18.1, their highest being 16, lowest being unranked, and an even higher standard deviation with a 1.62. New to the rankings this week, but not new this season, is your Alcazio roster. Since the last time they were ranked, they've made a roster change. This is Dr. Known, Toxed, and Toxic now. These guys had an average ranking of 17.9, with their highest being 16, lowest being unranked, and an even higher standard deviation of 2.03. At number 16, moving up one spot from last week, is your Banana Head Fever Torsos squad of Wildcard. These guys had an average ranking of 16.8. Their highest placement was a 15. Their lowest was just barely unranked. They were an honorable mention in our only unranked ranking. Their standard deviation was a 1.79. Down 2 spots from last week is your Space Station roster of Kofor, Scribbles, and Reveal. These guys had an average ranking of 14.3. One person had them 10th, one had them 14th, and everyone else had them 15th. This gave them a standard deviation of 1.66. Moving down 3 spots from last week is your Complexity trio of Frosty, CRR, and Diaz. These guys had an average ranking of 13.2, with their highest placement being a 12, lowest being a 14, and a pretty low standard deviation of 0.83. Our biggest mover down on the rankings this week was Geek Esports, moving down 5 spots. This is Joyo, Oli, and Archie. These guys had an average ranking of 12.7, and by far and away the highest range of placements I've seen so far. They had an highest placement of 8, lowest placement of 19. This led to a standard deviation of 3.2. Coming off of an event win in South America, Team Secret moves up 2 spots to number 12. They had an average ranking of 12.4, with their highest being a 10, their lowest being a 15, and a standard deviation of 1.51. Moving out of the top 10 for the first time this season is your Ninjas in Pajama squad of Itachi, Oski, and Nas. These guys had an average ranking of 10.9, with their highest being 8, lowest being 14, and a pretty high standard deviation of 1.9. Into your top 10 is your North American 3 seed of Gen.G Mobile 1 Racing with Justin, Magic Bear, and Cheese. These guys had an average ranking of 10.1, with their highest placement being at 7, lowest being at 12, and a standard deviation of 1.62. Moving up 7 spots, and no doubt your highest movers of the week, is Seiko, Juicy, and Eugen on the Gentlemates roster. These guys had an average ranking of 9.8, their highest being 7, lowest being 12, and a standard deviation of 1.48. Down 1 spot from last week is your Twisted Minds roster of Napo, Atomic, and Rise. These guys had an average ranking of 8.1, with their highest being 7, lowest being 10, and a standard deviation of 0.93. Up 2 spots from last time is your Dignitas squad of apparently Jack, Jorias, and Stizzy. These guys have an average ranking of 7.9, with their highest being 7, lowest being 11, and a standard deviation of 1.36. Similar to what we saw after the major, there's a pretty clear cutoff, as every person had the same top 6 teams. Your 6th team on that list is Team Falcons with Rawas, Kaliers, and TRK. They had no movement from last week. Their lowest placement is still 6, but they did have a couple rankings at 5. They had an average ranking of 5.8 and a standard deviation of 0.44. Down 1 spot from last week, coming off their only domestic loss of the season so far, is Yan, Lost, and Jerfinio representing Furia. These guys had an average ranking of 5.1. Their highest was at 4, but their lowest was down to 6 and a standard deviation of 0.6. I said part of the reason I wanted to add more people to the aggregate is so that we would avoid ties, but that being said, it's already the second time with 9 people, and we've got a tie for 3rd place. This is Team Vitality, Zen, Exotic, and Monkey Moon. They're technically up 2 spots since they end up tying for 3rd place. Their average ranking was a 3.4, with their highest being a 2, their lowest being a 5, and a standard deviation of 1.01. They are tied with the Ultimates, having LJ Chronic and First Killer. These guys are technically down one spot from their number 2 ranking last time. They had a highest placement of 3, lowest placement of 4, which led to a much lower standard deviation of 0.53. And up one spot into the number 2 is Beast Mode Daniel and Atomic, coming off their domestic win. NRG Esports has an average ranking of 2.2, with their highest placement being a 2 and their lowest being a 3. This led to a standard deviation of 0.44. And unsurprisingly, Carmine Corps still holds the unanimous number 1 spot after winning their European regional and barely losing it all this season. Highest placement 1, lowest placement 1, standard deviation nothing. Y'all know the drill. Here is the graphic of the rankings by associate. Unfortunately, this week we weren't able to be joined by ButteryHotness, but we did get our first rankings coming from Will. So here, take a look at it. This is how everyone had all the 20 teams ranked. Also, be sure to check out the episode of the talk show that I did with Rhawkets this week. We unveiled our top 20 rankings to each other right after the South American Open ended, so you can kind of see us guessing what's going to happen in the North American Open and talking about 9 lives. That was a fun conversation that unfortunately didn't age the best. But yeah, feel free to check that out. It's the video I released yesterday, and it will be popping up at the end of the screen. Aside from that, thank you all for watching. Looking forward to seeing Open 5, and I will catch you guys next time.